How's everybody doing?
Good.
Yes. As Kara said, I'm the Director of Technical Training and Education at Puppet Labs. That means that if you've taken Puppet Fundamentals, Practitioner, or Architect, or the old Advanced class, or the even older Extending Puppet, which was for developers using Ruby, or even the much older Puppet Masters class, which was the very first training class, all of that is produced and created out of my team. The Learning VM that you can download that comes with the Quest guide, that comes out of my team. All of the online classes. So basically, anything that you need from an educational perspective, my team is responsible for creating that. I've been with Puppet 2.5 years. I started actually just right at the same time as Kara. We were just talking. My second week, we had just finished up Puppet Fundamentals, and we were doing it internally. We're delivering it internally. I had started, and my job was to come in and take what a professional service engineer had created in terms of content. His name is Ryan Coleman. He's now the product owner for The Forge. He wrote the big bulk of that course, and my first job when I came in was to clean it all up and make it presentable. So my second week, and I had not used Puppet prior, my second week I was in a class going through his fundamentals material. Kara was in there. She had never even touched the command line before. I taught Unix and shell scripting and all that stuff at Sprint for years, so while not a sysadmin, I had played in the world for almost a decade. There was a peer of mine that was, she runs the certification program. You may have come across her, Jamie Rosa. She was in the class as well. She had never touched a command line before. We just wanted butts and seats just to see what the reaction to the class was like. Kara got through it. She made it all 3 days.
So you can too.
Let's give Kara a round of applause. Jamie wanted to quit, but I wouldn't let her. She got through it as well. And I think, hopefully, 2.5 years later, Puppet Fundamentals is a lot better of a course than it was when I started. So, I'm originally from Texas, from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But I've been living in Portland for 3 years. I flew in last night, and I was reminded, I'm spoiled living in Portland because we live in the southeast part of the city. I'm like a 10-minute bike ride to the office. I can get on the bus, it's just right there, it's 20 minutes maybe. They're bringing in a Max line just right through our neighborhood, so that's gonna be nice. Even if I were to drive to work, it's probably 20 minutes. Now, granted, Portland is nothing like Atlanta, but I flew in last night, and it was nice. There was no traffic. It was, I think my plane landed at 9 o'clock, something like that, but it still took forever to get up here. And it reminded me of being back in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I want to start by asking about how long it took you to get here today. Because I started thinking, well, who came the furthest? Who came the longest? But it really is kind of a dumb question because you're going to drive from anywhere in the city for an hour. So I'm kind of curious, who drove longer than an hour to get here this morning? That's ridiculous.
That's 10 miles away.
So that's even more ridiculous. Who drove more than an hour and a half? Who drove more than 2 hours? That's incredible. Thank you. That's incredible. Who is not from this area and came in? Okay. Where are you guys from?
Knoxville.
Okay. So I guess you came in yesterday and stayed overnight?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Knoxville. Where are you from?
Charlotte.
Okay.
Knoxville, Alabama.
Wow. Impressive. Well, thank you. For those of you that sit in a car and drive that long, bless you, because I couldn't do it. Before I moved to Portland, I lived in Cardiff, Wales for 5 years. So I don't know if you're not familiar with the UK. Cardiff is about 180 miles due west of London. And Cardiff is the capital of Wales. It's even smaller than Portland, maybe 350,000, 400,000 people. But again, lived sort of in the city and public transport and that sort of thing. You didn't drive an hour. I mean, you could be in the hills and mountains in an hour. So I've not driven like you have to drive here in a decade, and I don't miss it. So. Okay, let's ask a few more questions. Who is currently, because Carrie even mentioned that we have a strong Puppet community here in Atlanta, who is currently using Puppet right now? Wow. What about PE, Puppet Enterprise? Okay, very good. Who's using something else for automation? 1, 2, 3 hands, 4. Who's, yeah, and maybe not a vendor package. Maybe by automation you mean shell scripts. Who's rolling that way? Yeah. Okay. Good. So this should be the converse of the first question. Who's using nothing at all? Not Puppet, not a competitor, not shell script, no automation at all. A couple of you. Okay. And then of those that are using Puppet, who's been using Puppet for 6 months or less? And this could either be PE or Puppet. Okay, right around 6 months. What about 6 months to a year? Okay, I'm expecting a lot of hands to go up. A year or more? Wow, very good. So then, I kind of feel like some of what we're going to talk about you're already going to know. But obviously, one of the things that we try to do with our Puppet camps around the country and even overseas is introduce people to some of the core concepts and the stack, both open source and on the enterprise side. So for those of you that are veterans, you'll have to forgive some of the things that will be repetitive to you. One of the things that we like to talk about, and I think Luke used this slide deck in Dusseldorf for the very first time just a few weeks ago, and he went through basically an overview of sort of the landscape in which we find ourselves in IT and technology. And one of the things that we bring up a lot is that being a sysadmin is hard. It's sometimes that thankless job that is really about you putting out fires and less about you strategically thinking about how to make your business better. It's this idea that, so there was a study done, and in the study it was a survey of sysadmins and sort of their day-to-day work life. And the report came back and showed that on average, sysadmins are interrupted once every 15 minutes with an issue. And so I see some heads nodding. I'll take that to mean that that's probably something that, while it may not completely apply to you, it's probably fairly close. The other side of that same coin is that after an interruption, it can take up to 30 minutes for you to get back into the groove of what you were doing before you were interrupted. You think about your workday and what that means for you and your business and actually making the infrastructure that you're managing better instead of just putting out fires, you've got to have some help, right? The other thing that we sort of see in the landscape is that sort of IT and tech is really more critical than it's ever been. There was this shift in the late 90s, early 2000s for big companies to sort of offshore their tech and their IT, right? They just didn't want to deal with it. And what we're finding now is that sort of the converse is happening. We're finding that companies are realizing that IT and technology is actually, or should be, a competitive advantage. And if it's not for you and your company, you can probably bank on it being one for your competitor. And so we're seeing a big shift in the market. And one of the things that then means is that we have to be faster and more focused. And not necessarily faster in the sense that we get more stuff done more quickly, but that we operate with a higher velocity, that we decrease cycle times, right? That they're faster, that we don't have to worry with getting interrupted every 15 minutes and then taking 30 minutes to recover from that interruption. Has anybody seen the DevOps report that we released a few months ago? A couple of you? It's still available on the website. Well, I'll find a link and share that with you later. I think it's worth a read. One of the things that we did is we took surveys of over 9,000 individuals, people just like yourselves, and sort of what their day in and day out practices are like. And I think what we're finding is that there are a lot of companies that have maybe bought into the term without really knowing what goes with it. At the same time, I think there are companies that are embracing this notion that operations teams and dev teams can actually work in sync. And that the operations team doesn't have to just be sort of that team that lives in the land of no, right? Where developers come in and say, we need this thing to be released at this time, and those of us in ops say, no, can't do it. We can put it on the project backlog and we'll get to it in 6 to 8 months, and they say, 6 to 8 months isn't gonna work, I'll just go do it myself, right? So I would say take the time to read through that report, and my hope would be that there's some things that gel with you and how you're doing things day to day that you would find that other people are doing day to day. I'm tired of hearing the word cloud, but it is the reality in which we find ourselves. I think our spin on it, I think our take on it has been this. Where in the late 90s, companies were sending out tech, they didn't want to deal with it. We're seeing the reverse of that, where they're saying, no, tech should be an advantage to us and our business. I think what this means for us in the way that we look at this at Puppet Labs is that it's a little bit nuanced. For us, this is where we take a look at SaaS and we say, let's let us focus on what we're good at, and let's use other companies and what they're good at, right? And that's cloud to us. So that means for us, that means we use Salesforce, right? Because we don't want to build and manage and host in-house a CRM, right? That takes us away from our core business. An HR backend. I think we just launched one called UltiPro, right? Like, look, nobody wants to build that and manage that in-house. Email servers, file sharing, file serving, no, that's why we go to Box, and that's why we go to Dropbox, and that's why we use those things, because those are the things that those companies are good at, right? So we let those companies do those things that they're very good at, and we use them so that we can focus on the things that we're really good at. Because I guarantee you, if we went to my ops team and said, we need you to spin up, host, and manage email servers. Like, stop. Come on. We're just going to use Gmail, right? Because who wants to do that in-house, right? So I think for us, I mean, yeah, we can talk about EC2, and we can talk about Google Compute, we can talk about all those things, but I think for us, in the way that we look at sort of the marketplace and the way we look at the landscape, cloud means leveraging those companies and letting them do what's they're really good at for the benefit of us. Docker is sort of the next big thing, I guess, if you listen to certain people talk. But I think what they've presented to the market is another little shift. It's another little thing to think about. I mean, this whole idea of immutable infrastructure where I kind of find it to be amazing, actually. But I think the idea is you deploy something to production, and then when changes need to be made, you're like, screw it, let's just bring up another server with that change in it, and when it's up and running, we'll pull down the one that was there, right? So we're not going in and making changes to the thing that was running. We're just going to spin up a whole new stack, deploy that, let it get up and running, pull the other one down, right? And that's simply not the way we've been doing things, right? And so it's another little shift in the landscape that we have to be aware of. And then I think the last one that we're sort of paying attention to is this notion of shadow IT. I mean, I can say that I've seen it in-house at Puppet, although it's not one of those things that you're really proud about. But shadow IT is this idea that you even have sort of internal competition for the way things are working. So it's kind of that idea a minute ago of going to ops and saying, I'll give you a real life example. So we're, in Q1 of next year, we're going to be launching some virtual classes. It's not a plug for our virtual classes, although you should take them. But it's more about sort of the infrastructure that we're using to host and manage those classes. And so we've looked at companies like SkyTap, which again, that's sort of that, let companies do what they're really good at doing and leverage them. I mean, that doesn't mean that you have to pay them. So SkyTap will take sort of virtual environments and host them for you so that your students, wherever they're taking their class from, can log in and you don't have to host the machines yourself and they don't have to download a 2 gig VM and all of that sort of thing. So my team is sort of wrestling through the best way to manage these classes and how we want to host our VMs. Are we going to make people download stuff like they do for fundamentals, which seems silly for a 3-hour course? Like, what do we want to do? And so we go to ops and we start talking through it with them. And it's granted, it's not a complaint, but you look at their schedule and their project backlog, and there's no way we're going to get that done in Q4 ready to launch next year. So maybe it was my fault I didn't go to them sooner. Maybe it's their fault they're not managing their project, right? That's that internal competition that we're having to deal with. And so for us, I'm looking, well, I guess that means I'll just go find my own solution. And I would bet that you've got those same kinds of stories, especially if you're on the ops side and you've got developers coming to you and you just can't iterate and operate as quickly as they want you to. And if we can't, then that means, are they going to sit and wait, or are they just going to go find their own solution, right? So this is sort of the world that we live in. And with all of that, it brings us to why Puppet Labs exists, right? Like why we're here. We're here to help you sort of manage that landscape. And Puppet, really, in a nutshell, allows you to automate repetitive procedures and manual tasks and let that happen behind the scenes so that you don't have to worry about it, so that you can, if you're on the ops team, you can focus on those projects that are coming from developers, right? Because if you're putting out fires you don't have time for them, you put Puppet in place, let Puppet handle the manual, the repetitive tasks that are always going to have to be there, and you let Puppet take care of it, so that you don't have to. So, Puppet manages the aspects of your infrastructure that are always going to exist. Things like users and groups, NTP, kernel settings, files that need to exist and be present on a server at all time. All of those things, regardless of the operating system, regardless of whether it's a physical machine, a virtual machine, or something that's hosted in the cloud, regardless of whether it's a network device, like a Cisco switch, or a storage device, or even applications themselves, Puppet has the ability to manage those things for you. The only thing that I want to point out, because this is, you can read for yourselves, I'm definitely not going to read that to you, but one of the things that I want to point out is on that second line about productivity, and the little definition there about defining once and running 1,000 times. One of the things that we talk about very early on in Puppet Fundamentals is this idea of item potency. Who can tell me what that means? It's time for group participation. Go ahead.
Define state and then bring that system to that state.
Okay. And what happens if Puppet runs again?
There's no change.
And again, and again, and again, and again. Item potency is this idea that you define it once, it's declared, or it's defined, it's declared, it's set up, and Puppet can run 1,000 times, and if there's no change, Puppet's not going to break anything. You can't say the same thing necessarily unless you're really good at shell scripting. You can't say the same thing for this idea of, I'm going to create this shell script, I'm going to run this shell script, and then you always are going to ask yourself, what happens if I run it again? Right? You've got to take into account this idea that with shell scripts or some other self-baked tool, is it structured in a way that I can run it repeatedly and it not break something that was actually fixed? So Puppet runs in an idempotent way. It can run once and then 1,000 times, and it's not going to break anything. It only changes the things that need to be changed. So, and we'll walk through a couple of code examples just to sort of hone all of this in, but sort of the idea is that you define the desired state of your system, the way you want things to look. You can even test what it would look like to implement those changes, right? And kind of see this is how many nodes are going to be changed, how many resources within those nodes are going to be changed. And then obviously you can enforce those changes And then the nice thing is that Puppet will shoot back some reports and let you look at the changes that it just made. So wow, that's no good. Just ignore the purple stuff because it's not as important. So the holy trinity, so to speak, of resources and creating classes and then manifest and modules is sort of the file package service trinity. So this is a class simply called SSH. I'm not going to go through all of this. Here's what I want to say. You've got resource types, in this case package, file, and service. And those resource types are defined by attribute value pairs, right? So very simply, there is this package that needs to exist on this machine, right? There is this file that needs to be set to root with these permissions. Here's its source. It needs to always be there, right? Here's this service, SSHD. It needs to be running. We're defining not a list of steps for Puppet to take, but a state of being, the way the box should look. And so, when Puppet runs, if any of these things are not this way, Puppet makes the change. So if SSHD is not running, that's when Puppet would enforce a change. And here's what's nice. It doesn't matter really the operating system. So this is same concept, but on a Windows machine. So what's even better is that a case, like simple case statement, right? So it's just querying the OS family. If the box is a Windows machine, the slide before gets implemented. If it's Red Hat or Debian, the slide even before that gets implemented, right? So it's a very simple, when Puppet runs, it cases the operating system and applies the appropriate changes to resources that have been changed. So, the way all of this is structured, the way all of this is set up, is in modules. So think of a module as basically a container for things that are related in functionality. Okay? So we would take those guys and we would drop them in, not all of them, we would drop those into a .pp file, which is your manifest. So it goes in that top directory underneath module name. And then any associated files, templates, any tests that you have set up, all of that stuff falls under one directory with the name of the module, and you're done. It's that one module. And so for every aspect of your infrastructure, you're creating those modules. So that's why when you go out to the Puppet Forge and you say, I don't know, I need to manage NTP, right? Don't write it yourself. Go to the Forge. Somebody's already done it, right? And you get a module, and you install that module, and it's all of this stuff. It's the .pp, it's the manifest, all the files that go with it, any templates that are needed, right? They've got it all done for you. So, all of those modules live on the server, live on the Puppet server, which is nice. When you think about it, a couple of things that make this sort of nice. One is the fact that by being on the server, it's safer, right? In other words, if one of your nodes is compromised, the infrastructure for that node is the only thing they would find there. Like the idea of taking your infrastructure and the structure of your entire network and replicating that structure on every node means that if a node is compromised, they understand how everything is structured. It's sort of silly, right? The only thing that is on that node in terms of its structure is for that node only. Right? Because that's all it cares about. Everything else sits on the Puppet Master. The other thing is, in terms of benefit, is just the idea of use, the idea of code changes and deployment, and not having to deploy a module to 1,000 nodes. It sits on the Puppet Master, right? So you don't have to, you're sending it to one place, and that's the Puppet server, not 1,000 nodes. So real quickly, because I'm going to keep to my time and let the next speaker have their full time at 10, so I'm going to speed up. This is very basically the node cycle. So here's how things kick off. Every 30 minutes, you can change that, that's the default. Every 30 minutes, the agent or the node, interchangeable, will fire up and check in with Puppet Master. And will say, here's all my facts. This is what I know about myself, right? So if you've ever played around with factor, that's where the facts come from, right? So IP address, OS family, essentially anything you would want. Factor has all of that, throws it down to the Puppet Master, and the Puppet Master takes those facts and compiles a catalog of that desired state, right? So there's a comparison that's done, sends that catalog back to the agent and says, here's desired state, here's where you're off in some areas, and the agent implements the change to get back to desired state. Every 30 minutes this happens. After changes are made, reports get sent back to the Puppet Master. Who's using PuppetDB? If you're on PE, you are, because it's with it. But for you open source users, you should be. PuppetDB basically stores, PuppetDB knows everything. And that's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it stores all your configurations, all your facts, all your reports. It is sort of the foundation for Puppet and Puppet Enterprise storage. So I would highly encourage you to get on the PuppetDB train if you're not. M-Collective, that thing we all love to hate. Built on ActiveMQ. This is sort of the, if you're looking at a coin, you look at the fact that Puppet is declarative, whereas MCO or M-Collective is interactive, right? Puppet is giving you the defined state of our system, where MCO is letting us do real-time interaction with that system, right? From the command line, if you're on PE and you want to play around with MCO, you can do it through live management. But this is MCO is one of those things where if you wanted to query which node has which version of some package, right? MCO is your friend. If you were at PuppetConf or you listened to the talks afterwards, then you heard Luke talk about sort of the next generation of that Puppet server. Basically, this replaces, I think it was Nginx and Passenger that we had on the front end, that thing that talks to all of the agents. This replaces that and is built on JVM and that stack. One of the big benefits is, well, we're replacing multiple services with one. It was written in Clojure, so it's really fast, especially compared to the old Puppet server. And so this was included in 3.7 that just came out as well. Razor has been in tech preview on the PE side for the last couple of releases, but Razor is that tool that allows us to provision physical machines. And the idea with Razor, and I'm not going to get into Razor because I don't know that anybody's here to talk about Razor today, but the idea behind Razor is that with the same sort of ease and flexibility that we have in provisioning virtual machines or things in the cloud, Razor brings to physical machines. Who uses Hyra? That's excellent. Who can explain Hyra? That's maybe the trickier question. So I don't know if you, I used to dabble in web development years ago, and the idea in web development, especially when cascading stuff, when CSS sort of hit the scene, the idea was that you separated content from presentation, right? So content was your HTML file, presentation was your CSS file, right? I kind of think of Hyra the same way, right? Hyra is that separation from like hard-coded site configuration data. You put all of that in Hyra, not in your modules. Okay? So the idea of building modules that can be reused by other people would rely on Hyra. right? The idea that you've got modules that define nodes, right? So like, let's say you've got a cluster of nodes that are sitting in Atlanta and you've got a cluster of nodes that are sitting in London, right? So you're probably going to have some DNS differences. They're probably playing in some different IP spaces, so that's going to be different. If you're hard-coding those values in your modules, you're going to run into some issues, right? So you take those values, the site configuration data, that's a constant, you throw that in Hira, and basically, simplified version, it's a variable reference to that data, and it pulls it into your module, right? Use it. R10K, who's using R10K? Also excellent. Again, it's something that I would definitely recommend you look at, and I would not be surprised if you don't see R10K in future versions of PE. R10K is the idea around environment control, moving code through environments. So I've got to really speed up. Quick show of hands. Who is operating in, hopefully more than one, but at least 2 environments? Okay? 3? 4? Wow. Okay, we won't go that far. So the idea with R10K is the notion of Puppet being integrated into those environments, right? So let's say you have dev, staging, and production. You're doing some dev work on the latest release of, I don't know, Apache, right? And so production is running on a known version of Apache. You're changing and updating modules and tied to a development environment. R10K, if you were to make changes in that development environment to those modules based on the latest version of Apache, it allows you to move that change, that module change through your environments, right? Think Git, right? It's source control, right? And so R10K is tying that source control to change through environments for you. Okay, I'm going to skip through a couple of these. I just want to highlight the fact that if you're paying attention in the Puppet Enterprise space, you heard Luke talk about Puppet apps at PuppetConf. The first one being Node Manager that was just released in 3.7. We've already talked about the next-gen Puppet server. I'll give you a little screenshot of the Puppet server reporting in 1 second. So who knows about supported and approved modules, right? Have you been hearing about these things? So on the supported side, that's for PE customers. On the approved side, what we've done with modules, what we're starting to do, because I think if you pay attention to the forge, you'll see that there's over 2,000 modules that live out there. And so Puppet approved basically means that those modules that the community seems to care about and use, we've taken the extra steps of testing them in-house, and it's sort of our stamp of approval. We're saying, you can use these. Like, we have faith in these being used by the community, right? That's Puppet approved. Puppet supported, same sort of thing, but much more rigorous testing, and those are available to PE customers. So here's sort of what Luke laid out at PuppetConf with this idea behind Puppet apps. Like I said, Node Manager was the first one. You can see that in 3.7. And then I think what you'll see progressively from here on out is other apps that are laid down. These are built on sort of our core, the core Puppet stack. And anybody with a license to PE will get these in the next release when those come out. So Node Manager is the first one that was released. It was announced at Conf, came out in 3.7. Think of Node Manager like you do, like maybe iTunes Smart List. Right, it's sort of that set it once, forget it kind of thing. And then when you import new music, the smart list just updates automatically. Same sort of concept, right? Instead of managing nodes based on their identity, you're managing nodes based on their capabilities. It allows you to classify your nodes based on key characteristics, like operating systems, geographic locations, IP addresses, So yeah, if you're not on PE, at least download the demo so that you can play around with it. And then this, again, bad slide projector. But this is the screenshot of what we demoed in Luke's talk at PuppetConf about Puppet server reporting using Grafana. So basically, one of the things that I think would be helpful to know is sort of load on your Puppet server, especially as it's talking to agents when it's going through cycle time. This is what you would use. Active requests, request duration, execution times, compilation loads, all of those you can find within Puppet server reporting. And it comes prepackaged with Graphite reports, and then you can sort of build out and customize your own as well. Okay. So a little bit of the open source, a little bit of the enterprise. And I guess we'll finish with sort of asking, so what? What does this mean? Like, who cares? And I would even go a step further, why should you implement Puppet or PE at your company? I think this also came out of the DevOps report that I referenced earlier, but when we look at companies that are serious about IT automation, they're serious about configuration management, they're serious about embracing sort of the day-to-day practices of DevOps, what we find in those companies is what the report sort of showed us, is that they deploy code up to 30 times more frequently with 50% fewer failures, and that's overall. And I think this would probably be applicable. You actually make more money, right? I mean, I know it's a simple construct, but when systems are up and operating as they should, and your company can do what your company is supposed to do, you're making money. So, we like to throw this in just for giggles, but Puppet was by this was a survey that DICE did in terms of job postings, and Puppet came out as the fastest growing tech skill when they did this survey. And this is growth rate, not obviously overall adoption. But I think more than anything, not to sort of toot our own horn, but what I think this shows that there is value in the marketplace for automation. And so if you're not, you need to be. All right, so we'll finish with some next steps. You've seen Kara, you've met Kara, you've heard Kara speak. This slide is all about Kara. Kara's part of the community team at Puppet Labs, and so I would encourage you, if you're not on the IRC channel, on Freenode, you should be. Our mailing list, especially the dev mailing list, I think is a good place to be. You can go to ask.puppetlabs.com. I think you'll get a little bit different type of question there than you'll find maybe in IRC. IRC seem to be sort of quick hit, hey, I've got this problem, can somebody help me? Whereas Ask seems to be longer form type questions and answers. And then obviously we would love for you to help with bug fixes by contributing code to our open source projects. If Ryan Coleman was here, he would tell you to please contribute modules to the Forge, because that's his thing. So yeah, I'd stop me or Kara during one of the breaks, and we can help you get plugged into all of these. I mentioned this earlier, but sign up for an account online, puppetlabs.com/learn. That'll give you access to all of our free online courses. I think right now we've got, I don't know, around 25 or so. Just after the new year, we're going to be launching a new version of all of our online learning, basically everything around education. And we're going to take the idea of sort of course bundles. So if you're interested in configuration management, you're going to be able to log in, and we're going to give you a bundle of courses that you should take for config management, right? So we're going to sort of do our best to sort of meet you guys where you're at, instead of just throwing everything at you and say, here, take it all, because that's not helpful. I'm sure you've probably been on the docs site. It's getting prettier and better and cleaner all the time. So if you've not been in a while, I would encourage you to go back. And then as I mentioned sort of at the beginning, fundamentals, practitioner, and architect, all of our instructor-led classes. We always get this question, so it seems I've not done a very good job of how we communicate it, but that's not linear. Don't go take fundamentals, then take practitioner, then take architect. It'll make your head explode. Everybody should take fundamentals, right? After you take fundamentals, choose either practitioner or architect. So if you're like the day-to-day ops guy, you're writing Puppet modules, that sort of thing, you take practitioner. If you're sitting at maybe not higher in terms of seniority or job title or anything, but if you're sitting at the site level and you care about multiple puppet masters, scaling, things like R10K, take architect. So completely different target audiences there. Has anybody been a test pilot before? You get one of these fancy shirts when you do it? So the puppet test pilots do two things. They'll either get your feedback on things that are currently in production. They'll kind of want to sit over your shoulder and watch how you do things to sort of gauge what's working, what's not working. So that's one way that we use this program. The other thing that we do is give people access to things that we've not yet released. They may still be wireframes, they may be just a rough working copy of something, and we get feedback on that. So these are either things that are in production and we get feedback on, or things to be released, but you get an Amazon gift card and a shirt, so sign up for that as well. And then obviously we're hiring. I'm not headhunting, I'm just saying we're hiring all the time, so if you're ready for a change, then take a look. I don't know that we have, I don't want to take up the next speaker's time with questions, but maybe just one or two. I went quick, and that's okay, because I want the speakers that signed up to be
We're going to take
talk.
one, oh, this isn't working. We're going to take one question, and then we're going to have a bunch of questions later in the day. So whoever has the question, put your hand in the air, and you have to speak into the microphone, I'm sorry. No one. Oh, we have nothing, okay.
It's impressive.
I'm going to give it another second. Yes, thank you. There you go.
Why did you say love to hate and collect?
Oh, it's one of those things. I think probably I should have qualified. I think maybe on the PE side, I think people, because live management uses MC on the back end, under load, it really starts to slow down the GUI, the console. So I should have qualified. I think from command line, great. I think in the console, under heavy load, MCO is not the greatest thing. So I should qualify. Thanks. That's it.
That's Brad being very honest with all of you. Round of applause.